Hello biology buddies, and welcome to lesson 2 from the B3 AQA unit, Infection and Response. Today's lesson is about diseases and how to prevent their spread. The outcomes for today's lesson is to recall the 7 diseases that are on the AQA GCSE specification. There are 2 bacterial, 3 viral, 1 fungal, and 1 protist disease that you need to know. If you've done the homework from lesson 1, you already have a good head start on this and know what the 7 diseases are and the symptoms that they cause. We're going to describe how pathogens are spread generally, and then we're going to use that information to explain how the spread of pathogens can be slowed or prevented. So again, there are 7 diseases on the AQA GCSE specification. For each disease, you don't need to know a lot of detail, but you need to know what type of pathogen causes the disease, how it causes the disease. You can look back at lesson 1 for more information about that, and then some of the symptoms of the disease. So here are the 7 diseases that we need to know: Salmonella, gonorrhea, HIV, measles, TMV, rose black spot, and malaria. If you haven't done the homework from the previous lesson, I suggest you stop, go on the internet, do a little bit of research, find out the information rather than just having me tell it to you. Okay, lots of information on here. The most important thing is for you to remember what type of pathogen causes each of the 7 diseases. We'll go through them in order together. Salmonella, a lot of people have probably had salmonella food poisoning. It's not very pleasant. It can involve fever, vomiting, and diarrhea, just general unpleasantness. And it's usually caused by the unhygienic preparation of food, particularly undercooked chicken or other sorts of meats. The bacteria is on the food, and it's one of the reasons why we need to cook food, is to kill the pathogens that can be living on it. Gonorrhea is another bacterial disease. This one is a sexually transmitted disease, and symptoms include yellow or green discharge from the penis or vagina and pain when urinating. If you have pain when urinating or a yellow or green discharge from your penis or vagina, you should see your doctor, and they will probably prescribe antibiotics to kill the bacteria that is causing the disease. HIV is a very, very nasty STD as well. And one of the reasons that it's really nasty is, if we remember from lesson 1, viruses get inside of cells, make copies of themselves, and then destroy the cells. So the actual type of cell that the HIV virus targets is part of the immune system. So as the virus is attacking the body, it's actually destroying the person's immune system. And over time, once that immune system is weak enough, it cannot fight off even a simple cold or other disease that normally the body wouldn't have very much trouble with. That's called AIDS, and that can be when the person is killed. Measles. Measles is hopefully a rare disease. It has been rare. It occasionally comes up when people choose not to get vaccinated. Measles is one of the M's when we talk about the MMR vaccine. It's measles, mumps, and rubella. And measles used to be a lot more prevalent than it is now. It's spread through droplet infection. So if somebody is sneezing or coughing, in the water that comes out of their face when they're sneezing or coughing might be the virus. That virus can go into other people's airways, so breathing it in, but also sometimes viruses through droplet infection will get onto surfaces, and then when people touch those surfaces, if they don't wash their hands and then they touch their face or they eat some food, the virus can get into the body that way. Measles will typically cause a rash and fever, but through complications can cause death. So it is not an important disease, and again, it's one that's been generally prevented through vaccination. TMV, not to be confused with TMZ, the American gossip television show or website, is tobacco mosaic virus. And it doesn't just affect tobacco, it affects over 150 different plant species, a lot of which are very economically important because of farming and agriculture. And essentially what it does is it causes dark patterns, a mosaic pattern, if you will, on the leaf. that pattern is going to not be green, it's going to be a dark color, and it's going to be blocking the sunlight from reaching the chlorophyll inside the chloroplasts of the plant cells, which is going to prevent it from doing photosynthesis. You probably know a little bit about photosynthesis already. You learn a lot more in Unit B4. B4 is essentially just about photosynthesis and respiration, but super important for the plant to be able to grow. So again, that comes up in Unit B4. Rose black spot is another plant disease. We talked about last lesson in the video how an example that people usually give of a fungal disease is athlete's foot, and that will affect people, and it can be in the water in showers that are shared and things like that. So when you walk through with your bare feet, you can pick it up that way. The one that comes up on the AQA GCSE spec is rose black spot. And as you can tell from the name, it primarily affects rose plants, and it puts black spots on the leaves, which, much like tobacco mosaic virus, limits photosynthesis, which means that the plant doesn't grow as well. For fungal diseases, because they can be spread so easily, it's really important that the farmer strip back all of the leaves that show rose black spot and then destroy them, so burn them or something like that, so that the fungus can't spread. The last one, which we talked about in the previous lesson as well, malaria is caused by a protist. Malaria, the protist that causes malaria gets into people's red blood cells and their liver, and that's how they cause disease, by damaging the red blood cells and the liver. We also talked about last lesson how malaria is transmitted through a vector. In this case, it's a mosquito. So the protist that causes malaria lives part of its life cycle in the mosquito. When the mosquito bites somebody, it injects anticoagulants into their blood to stop it from scabbing up so they can drink the blood really easily. And as part of that, if the Plasmodium vivax, which is the protist that causes malaria, is in the mosquito, it will also go into the person's blood, and then it can be passed back to a different mosquito, the next time that a mosquito feeds on somebody. So for malaria, really, really important that we remember that the vector for that is the mosquito. And those are the 7 diseases that you need to remember. How pathogens are spread. There are 3 sort of really big ideas that a lot of different things fall into of how pathogens are spread. So bacteria, viruses, fungi, protists. There are 3 main ones to be able to get from one place to another into somebody. Have a think of what those 3 could be before we move on. I'm sure that you'll get at least one of them. The 3 are water, air, and direct contact. Now, when we say water, that includes food, often people say, oh, there's 3, well, one of them is going to be water, one of them is going to be food. The water one includes the idea of food. For the water, drinking contaminated water, eating the food. So we gave the example of salmonella. You had contaminated, potentially chicken that wasn't cooked properly, so the salmonella bacteria wasn't killed and could be passed through to the person. Or even bathing in the water, drinking contaminated water. Air droplet infection. Remember, we talked about measles. Measles is passed through droplet infection. You have a liquid that comes out of the person's face when they sneeze or they cough, and that will have the virus or the other pathogen in it. It can be breathed in, so please do not cough or sneeze directly into people's faces. But also if they cough or sneeze onto a surface or onto their hands and then touch something, it can be passed on that way. And different pathogens will be able to live different lengths of time on different surfaces. So some surfaces that are porous or non-porous, different temperatures, all kinds of things will dictate how long the pathogen can survive before it dies. Direct contact is literally just the intermingling of any sort of biological fluid. So it could be sexual contact, it could be blood transfusions. If somebody gets a cut, then they've pierced through one of the barriers to pathogens, and the pathogen can get directly into the blood, but also touching the skin directly against the pathogen. So again, athlete's foot, although it's not GCSE spec, it's a good example of a pathogen that can be transmitted by just touching the skin against the pathogen. Now that we know the three main ways that pathogens are spread, we can start to come up with some ways that you can stop or slow down the transmission of or the spread of different pathogens. There's four general strategies. There's four sort of big ideas again that a lot of different things fall into. See if you can have a think of some different ways that we could stop the spread of pathogens, given that they are typically spread by air through droplet infection, by contaminated food or water, and then also through direct contact. The four we need to know are being hygienic, destroying vectors, isolating infected individuals, and vaccination. When we say being hygienic, that has a lot of different things: hand washing, using tissue when you sneeze and then binning it. It could also include things like cooking food properly. You could even include the idea of using some sort of barrier protection during sexual intercourse, so to prevent the direct contact between people. For destroying the vectors, this one specifically applies to diseases like malaria, where you have different insects that might carry the disease to the person. So in the case of malaria, it's the mosquito. Isolating infected individuals, this is often called quarantine. You take somebody who is infected and you put them away from the general population. So if it's a serious illness in a hospital where they will be seen by doctors and nurses who are wearing protective gear so that the pathogen can't spread to them, or if it is a less serious case, they may just be asked to stay at home and stay away from people. So for example, if you have the flu, people would generally stay away from you, would stay home until it passes, mostly because you really don't feel well, but also that's going to limit you from passing that disease on to other people. The last one is vaccination. We're going to have a future lesson on vaccinations, but essentially vaccinations will protect an individual and even a population by making them immune to the pathogen. And that has to do with training the immune system to recognize and quickly kill the pathogen. It's almost like a trial run. And again, we'll go into quite a bit more detail on how vaccines work, what's in them, and relate that to the immune response. Going back to our outcomes, we have our specific bacterial, viral, fungal, and protist diseases. See if you can name all 7 of them without looking at your notes and saying which one is bacterial, viral, fungal, and protist. Describe the 3 different ways that pathogens are spread, and then the 4 sort of big ideas on how we can limit or even stop the spread of those pathogens. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to put some past exam questions that cover stuff from lesson 1 and lesson 2 to go with this, as well as the mark scheme, so you can have a go at those and then self-mark. Thank you very much. See you next time.